All right, today I'm going to start by doing something that's probably not a good idea. Matter of fact, I know it's not a good idea because communicators are never supposed to start with something where you lose the room right off the bat. But I don't normally do this, you know this, but I have to talk about a controversial, extremely divisive issue right here at the beginning. So I realize I'll probably lose the room, but if you'll just hang with me and trust me, I don't want to have to talk about this, but it's necessary for what we're going to talk about today. If you're wondering what it is, we got to talk about math. Yeah. You thought it's politics? No, I'm not going there. We got to talk about math. And you laugh because I used to teach math. I taught it for a couple years to high schoolers, and if I had $1 for every time they said, I hate this, I'll never understand this, why do I need to know this anyway? I wouldn't be having to do this for a living. So anyway, I know nobody likes math hardly. Nobody likes math. But this is going to be important, so I want you to hang with me for just a second, all right? And try not to zone out. I was recording the Journey at Home version of this talk a few weeks ago, and we were like live, literally recording. And I start into this, and I say I'm going to talk about math. And one of the video production crew said out loud as I'm recording, "You're such a nerd." And I just was like, okay, so I kind of gauge how it's going to go with a real audience when I'm doing it there. So I'm not sure how well this will go. But give me about 2 minutes, okay? We'll see if we can get through this. Do you guys remember in math class, some of you are in math now, so maybe this will be more fresh. Do you remember in math class hearing this term? It was the term integer. Anybody remember this? Okay, this is better in first service. They clearly flunked out of math. Y'all are better. Okay, just to get us all on the same page, and here's what integer means. It simply means whole and complete, unbroken and undivided. That's all it means. So I'll give you some examples. The number 2, the number 20, 200, 2,000, 20,000, doesn't matter. Those are all integers because those are whole numbers. On the other hand, if you start talking about 3/5, 10 and 7/8, 1,000 and 3/16, you pick any of those. Those are not integers. Those are, does anybody remember what those are called? Yeah, that's what I thought. Fractions. Yeah. You're like, no, I don't. Don't quiz me, Matt. So yes. Fractions, okay? So you have integers, which are whole numbers. You have fractions, which are not whole numbers. And I already am getting the same glazed look I got when I taught high schoolers. So let me put this into terms that you're going to care about a little bit more, all right? I got to thinking, what would you actually enjoy hearing me talk about? So here's my question. Anybody, science, hey. He's like, get off the math, man. Can we talk about science? Buddy, I hate to tell you, but somebody's got to break it to you. Most of them don't care about that either. But I do, so I love it. I think you're amazing. No, who in here? Let me tell you what you're going to like more than science. Apple pie. That's what you're going to like more than science. So I'm going to put these two together, all right? You with me? I got a question for you. How many apple pies do we have? Again, 3 people answered in the first service. I was like, I don't know. Anyway, it's 1. That's right. It wasn't a trick question. It's 1. So because we have 1 whole apple pie, it makes this an integer pie. Okay? You with me? You're like, this is terrible. I know. Just hang on. It's an integer pie. Now, let's imagine that I give you this pie. You know what's good. Okay, yeah. I don't really have one. I'm sorry. Sorry to disappoint. If I give you this pie, you know what's going to happen to it very quickly. It's going to look a little more like this, right? And how many pies do I have now? Nope. I don't have, that's right. I don't have one. I don't have one because this piece, you're going to eat it. It's going to be gone. So we're going to say 7/8 of a pie, okay? 7/8 of a pie, but it's not a whole pie. And hey, boy, nailed it. Thank you, Devery. Nailed it. It's a fractured pie. That's exactly right. You guys all passed. Congratulations. Yeah. Good job. So now the question becomes, what in the world does this have to do with what we're talking about in church? Nothing at all. I just felt like, no. It has everything to do with it, but you're going to have to hold this thought for just a minute, okay? And we'll circle back to it because we are in week 3 of the series we've been in for a couple weeks now called The Perfect Guide to Life. We're talking about how integrity gives you clarity and gives you courage. Integrity is something we celebrate when we see it in others. It's something we criticize when others are lacking it. It's something we expect. Isn't this true? We expect it out of all the people around us. And yet, this is a bit ironic and hypocritical. We tend to excuse it away when we don't have it. If you're anything like me, if you don't have it, I'm upset, I'm holding you accountable. When I violate integrity, I always have a reason. It's like, what, you didn't understand the circumstances. I go on and on about all of that. So we tend to excuse it away in ourselves. But as we've learned in the series, if you allow yourself to excuse away your lack of integrity, there is a price to pay. As a matter of fact, King Solomon, there's a statement, a verse that he wrote that has become the foundational verse for this series. Solomon explains this to us. He wrote this. He said, the integrity of the upright will guide them. In other words, people who stand up straight, who take the long view, who look down the road, who think in terms of years and not days when they're making decisions, people who decide they're going to make integrity the primary decision-making filter in their life. Integrity is going to be the North Star. He says the integrity of those kinds of people will guide them. Integrity becomes the perfect guide for your life if you will do that. But on the other hand, he said, the crookedness of the treacherous. Now, crooked people are the ones who they're bent over, they're looking down, they're only focused on what's right in front of them. They're only focused on what they want in the moment. They're thinking about, what do I want now? What do I want now? And how do I get it? He said, people who make decisions that way, the crookedness of the treacherous, it will destroy them. It will destroy them. It will fracture their lives. And so the definition that we've been using for integrity is simply this. Integrity is doing what you ought to, even when it costs you. Integrity is doing the right and the noble thing, even though the right and the noble thing is going to have consequences attached to it. That's how you know you have integrity. Now, to connect all of these dots, okay, here's what's fascinating to me. The word integrity actually comes from the Latin root where we get our word integer, which means, and it's intentional, it means a person of integrity is a person who is whole and complete. They're unbroken and they're undivided. But whenever you violate your integrity or I violate my integrity, then we become fractured. Our lives become fractured. Our souls become fractured. We're not whole and complete. We're broken and we're divided now. And you know this, whenever your soul is fractured, you lose something that is extremely valuable to you. It might be the most valuable thing you have. You lose your peace. People with fractured souls, they're never at peace. They're not at peace with themselves. You know this. When you have violated your integrity, you weren't at peace with yourself, were you? They're not at peace with themselves. They're not at peace with others. When you're fractured, when your soul is fractured, it impacts the people around you. It impacts all of your relationships. And they're not at peace with God. Which brings up the question, why in the world would any of us choose to violate our integrity at the cost of the thing that we care about and want the most, which is peace? Why in the world would any of us do that? And the answer is because integrity is not the only thing vying for our attention. Integrity is not the only thing trying to pull you in a direction in life. The other thing that vies for your attention is appetites, desires, and we all have them. Now, this is just my opinion, so you can disagree, I might be wrong. I think all of us have at least 3 powerful primary appetites that pull at us. I don't know what yours are. It's probably different for all of us. For you, it might be an appetite for appreciation, for admiration, for acceptance. It could be an appetite for recognition or an appetite for respect. An appetite for progress. You should always want to make progress, to be successful. You may have an appetite for that. It may be an appetite for money or sex or power. I mean, we could go on and on. We could talk about them all day. There's so many. But all of us live in a world, and all of us, live our lives in such a way that it's not just integrity that's trying to guide us. Our appetites are trying to guide us too. And the thing about appetites is they always want the steering wheel, and they hate delayed gratification. Isn't that true? Your appetites never want to wait until tomorrow to get something. Your appetites never think about the long view. They don't. Yours are just like mine. When you have an appetite, it wants to be satisfied right now. Now, the irony of the whole thing is if you give in to your appetite and you allow it to pull you in a direction and ignore your integrity, the irony is that appetite is not ever fully or finally satisfied, is it? You can give it what it wants, and the next day you wake up and it wants more, and it wants more, and it wants more, because you just can't fully satisfy an appetite. So, the real world we live in, the real world you live in, this week is going to be a world where you're going to live with the tension of appetites pulling you in one direction and your integrity pulling you in another. And you have to figure out how to manage that tension. What do you do when you're caught between two things that are pulling you in two opposite directions, and one will make you really happy right now, but the other will make you happy in the long run? That's what we're going to talk about today. And to illustrate it, I want to share with you a Jewish story that happened centuries ago. It was all the way back around 1800 BC. And the story involves two brothers. You may be familiar with them, Esau and Jacob. Now, if you've never heard of them before, you probably heard of Abraham. Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Esau and Jacob. So these are Abraham's grandchildren. And as is often the case in families, Esau and Jacob are as different as they can possibly be. Esau's more of an outdoorsman. He loves to hunt and fish. He spends all his time out there working, in the fields. He's outside. He loves it. Jacob is more of a homebody. He's more of an indoorsman, okay? So he's the guy who just hangs out around the house, takes care of things, as you're going to see in a minute. He apparently was a bit of a chef savant. He was a great chef, okay? He enjoyed cooking and doing all that stuff. So two brothers who are polar opposites. But there's a tension, there's a dynamic in the family taking place because of Jewish culture back then that they couldn't avoid. Back in those days, if you were part of a Jewish family, the oldest male got what they called the birthright. So Esau, in this case, would have had a birthright that Jacob would not have had. And this birthright gave Esau three advantages over Jacob. The first one was whenever Isaac, their father, died, Esau was going to inherit 2 times as much as Jacob. That was the first advantage. The second advantage that he had was that Esau got judicial authority in the family. In other words, once Isaac died, Esau got to serve as a judge for the family. So anytime there was a conflict, Esau got to have the final say, and the whole family had to do whatever he had to say. That's convenient, isn't it? And then the third advantage was that Esau received his father's blessing, which in that culture they equated to receiving God's blessing. So you can imagine, if you're a younger brother or sister, you already know you don't feel like it's balanced and even, right? And then imagine growing up in a family where it's just not the natural feeling for it to be uneven, but it's legitimately like, oh no, he's got 3 advantages over you. This is the world they're living in. This is the world that Jacob's having to deal with. This is the future that Esau has, that he's certain of. And yet, as you're going to see in this story, they have to encounter this tension between integrity and appetites, and it ends up wrecking everything because of what they chose to let guide them. So, to give you a little context, here's how the story unfolds. It says, once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. So he's been out hunting or fishing, whatever he's been doing, probably been gone a while. You've had this experience, he came back in, he was starving. A few years ago, they called it hangry. Like that's where he is, okay? He's to the point of, oh my gosh, if I don't get something. He's so hungry. And, just so happens, Jacob's cooking some stew. He comes in, he smells it, he goes to the kitchen, he sees it. So as you could imagine, he looks at his brother and he says, quick, let me have some of that red stew. I am famished. Now I got to pause here because there's this unique dynamic that unfolds that you might miss if we read it too quickly. And those of you who have older brothers and sisters, especially if you're the youngest in the family, you will be able to appreciate this. It's extremely rare for the younger brother to ever have the upper hand on the older brother. Isn't that true? And so this is a really unique, rare situation for Jacob. He realizes in this moment, oh my gosh, I don't know if it's ever happened before, but I think I have the upper hand on my brother. So what does the younger brother always do when the older brother needs something? Do you remember this growing up, you younger siblings? The older brother came in and you said, oh, you don't want me to tell mom what time you came in last night? No problem. Happy to do it. I won't say a word. as long as, and then you had your conditions, right? You're going to drive me wherever I want for the next month. No, I'm not. Oh, well, I'll go tell mom. Oh, and you're going to clean my room too. And, you're going to do, you just rattle. When you're the younger and you find yourself in this situation, you ask for the moon. Like, you ask for something that's so outrageous because your plan is, and I get this, your plan is, he's going to reject that, but then I'm going to negotiate down to something that really is phenomenal, So I got to start way up here. So this is what Jacob's thinking. He's like, oh my gosh, I may never get this chance again. I'm asking for the moon. So Esau says, hey, can I have a bowl of stew? And Jacob looks back at him, as only a younger brother could, and says, well, yeah, first sell me your birthright. That's exactly right. It's like, are you kidding me? How ridiculous is that? Who would trade their birthright for a bowl of stew? Who would say, I'll just give you my whole future, younger brother, because I need some soup right now? It's ridiculous. Who would trade their integrity, their family, their relationship with their spouse or their kids, their career? Who would trade all of that for momentary satisfaction or happiness? Well, nobody would, right? I mean, that's why you laughed. We're on the outside of this. Like, nobody would. And everybody could. All of us could. Because you know what? What's different for us than it was for Esau is we're on the outside of this story where we have no emotion in this. We have nothing pulling at us. We have no appetites demanding they be satisfied. So we're on the outside going, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. Of course you say no to that, But when you're in the middle of it, come on, we all know this. When you're in the middle and emotions are swirling and appetites are screaming, it's really easy to do some dumb things, to make some dumb decisions, to make some terrible trades. Because in the moment, we want what we want. And so I think to the shock, not just of all of us, but to the shock of Jacob, Esau looks back at him and he says, look, I'm about to die, Jacob. What good's this birthright to me? Now I read this and I thought, could you be any more dramatic, Esau? You're not about to die. Grab a Snickers, man, and move on. Like, fix your own dinner. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. But he's lost sight of everything. And here's what's so interesting about this to me. You notice how Esau has started building a case in his own head to convince himself that this is the best decision to make? It's obvious a dumb decision. But Esau is going to lie to himself, to deceive himself into thinking the best thing for him to do in this moment is trade away his entire future for a bowl of stew. Now, the reason I bring that up is because if you haven't figured it out yet, you are just like me. You have an incredible capacity to deceive yourself. If you're not careful, you will lie to yourself over and over and over again and convince yourself to make decisions that you would never recommend someone else make if you were giving advice to them. But we all have a tendency to do it. When we want something, when our appetites rev up, when our heart gets set on something, it's almost as if it sends a message to your brain going, hey brain, come up with some reasons to convince me to do what I want to do right now, even though I know it's dumb. And we deceive ourselves into hurting ourselves, even though we know on the front end it's not in our best interest. Well, Jacob's standing there in the kitchen with his mouth wide open like, I cannot believe that he's going to fall for this. I was just starting negotiations way up here. And now you're saying you don't care about your birthright? I'm sure Jacob was probably like, yeah, you shouldn't care about your birthright. Your dad's going to live forever. It won't matter anyway. But Jacob's like, I don't want to be deceived here. So he looks back at his brother and he says, all right, swear to me first. And so Esau swore an oath to Jacob, selling his birthright to him. Now, oath was so important in that culture. An oath was unbinding, or was unbreakable, rather. It was binding. It was irreversible. Once you made an oath, deal was a deal. So Jacob knew at this point, oh my gosh, I got him. And just like that, Jacob fills his end of the bargain. He gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. Esau ate and drank. He got up and he left. The bowl was empty and the birthright was gone. In the time it took him to eat a bowl of soup, he forever altered his future. Because as you probably know from experience, it doesn't take long to make a wrong decision that you're going to feel the consequences of for years and years and years. And that's what Esau did. Now, it's interesting to me what the writer tells us next. Esau has an unusual, what seems like a really unusual reaction to this. He gets up, he leaves, and the writer tells us, so Esau despised his birthright. Now let me put that into terms we can understand. Esau walked out of the house and convinced himself that he didn't care about that birthright anyway. Esau walked out, and instead of owning the mistake he had made, Esau went, doesn't matter. I never cared about that thing. I didn't want it anyway. It's not a big deal. He refused to own the mistake he had made. Listen, I bet all of us have done that at some point. That we acted like we didn't care because it was too late to care and avoid the consequences of our carelessness. And so we just told ourselves, nope, not a big deal. Nope, doesn't matter to me. We told people, I don't care. I can't believe you. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I didn't care about that anyway. We just won't be honest with ourselves. We won't be honest with others. I hear this a lot of times when I'm talking to people and they're telling me about past decisions they've made, which were not wise, which were not smart. I mean, which kind of like Esau, you on the outside, you're like, well, that was dumb. They'll tell me about it, and then they'll say, but I have no regrets. I got no regrets. And I'm sitting there scratching my head like, really? No, I don't have any regrets. They look at me and they say, I wouldn't change anything. I'd do it all over again because it's made me who I am today. And I'm always like, you do realize you can become who you want to be without making all the mistakes to figure it out. That's like the hard way, right? Instead of making mistakes and learning from them yourself, you can learn from the mistakes of other people. You don't have to make them yourself. I do that with y'all all the time, by the way. I'm kidding. You do that with me, though, right? We all know. Like, you can look at the mistakes other people make and learn from them. You don't have to make them all. You don't have time to make them all anyway. So I always find it interesting when people are like, oh, I have no regrets. Now, if you're one of those people, listen, I'm not trying to be hard on you, but I want you to think about this. When you say, I don't care, I don't have any regrets, I do it all over again because this is where it's got me today, you know what you're ignoring? You're ignoring the pain that your decision caused all the other people around you. Can you imagine how it must sound to them when you did something that hurt them deeply and then you act like you don't care? It's not a big deal. I don't regret it at all. See, here's the problem with responding the way Esau did. Here's the problem with making a mistake and then compounding it by acting like it doesn't matter and you don't care. The problem is you can't be yourself as long as you're lying to yourself. You can't. You can't be yourself if you're not honest with yourself. You can't give yourself fully to anyone as long as you're lying to yourself. Because as long as you lie to yourself, you know what you have? You have a fractured soul. You make a decision to violate your integrity and then you refuse to own it and deal with it and be honest with yourself about it. I don't care if it was last week or a decade ago. Until you own that and deal with it, you continue to have a fractured soul. Which means you're not a whole person, so you can't give all of you to anybody because all of you has gotten fractured by your lack of integrity. And if you keep lying to yourself, it doesn't matter. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It wasn't a big deal. It doesn't matter. I don't regret it. It doesn't matter. I'd do it again. You refuse to give yourself the ability to regain your integrity fully and to heal. Which means you can't be yourself. And you can't be in a relationship where you're able to give all of you, which explains some of your relationship issues. Because you got a fractured self you're trying to give to somebody. And then you wonder why it just doesn't feel quite right. For Esau and Jacob, listen. From this moment on, you can read the story. From this moment on, they refused, both of them, to own what they had done. Obviously, Jacob had done something that he shouldn't have done. He was asking for things he didn't have a right to. Esau was violating his integrity to give up something so valuable that was so meaningful in his culture. But neither one of them were willing to own it. Neither one of them acted like they cared about what they had done. And it split the family. It haunted their family for years and years and years. Matter of fact, the tension, the conflict was so bad that Jacob had to flee. He had to leave his home. He had to leave his family. He went and lived in another country with his uncle. It just split the family apart. Because you can't avoid this. You can't outrun the consequences. You can't on your own just ignore the violations of integrity and become a person of integrity again. It doesn't work that way. So, my question for you today is simply this. What's your bowl of stew today? It's an odd way to ask it, I know, but we've all got something. We all have some appetite that today is screaming at us, is pulling at us. Some desire that's saying, take care of me right now. And it's probably the thing that you want to do because it's the thing that feels like it'll make you happy in the moment, because appetites are completely centered on what's right in front of us, on the today. Appetites never think about years down the road. So what's that thing for you? That thing that keeps telling you it's okay to let go of your integrity this time. That thing that keeps coming up with excuses for why, this isn't really a violation of integrity. Just go ahead and do it. What's that thing? It's not immoral. It's not illegal. But you really wouldn't want anybody to know about it. What's that thing? What's your bowl of stew today? Here's what I want to challenge you to do. You say, I don't want you to I get it. Challenge probably isn't the best word, but I'm going to use it because every now and then, if you care about somebody, you don't just say, you know what, you ought to think about it. Every now and then you're like, no, I want to challenge you to do this because one of these ways is going to work out great and one's not. And this is one of those situations. I don't have to know your story. I don't have to know your life. I don't have to know your situation. No, you choose an appetite over your integrity, it'll cost you every single time. It'll cost you more than you want to pay, and it'll cost you things you do not want to pay. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. If you can put your finger on what that appetite, what that desire is, what that thing is, it's hollering at you, going, hey, don't say no to me. You just let go of your integrity. My challenge is for you to decide, I will not trade what I value most for something I have an appetite for now. Just shut the door on it. Shut the door on it. Get out of the situation. Make whatever changes you have to quiet that appetite. Tell whoever you have to tell so that there's accountability, so you feel like you can't go back on it. Just decide, I'm not going to trade what I value most, my integrity. I'm not going to trade what I value most, my relationship with my family. I'm not going to trade what I value most, my marriage. I'm not going to trade what I value most, being known as a trustworthy person. I'm not going to trade what I value most for some appetite I have right now. I'm not going to do that with my money. I'm not going to lie to them about that. It's just a little deal and I've convinced myself. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to text them back, call them back, go see them. I'm not going to trade what I value most for some appetite that's screaming at me today, but does not care about where I'm going to end up tomorrow. Whatever your appetite is, would you make that choice? Would you think in terms of years and not days? When you live in the tension this week, would you choose integrity over your appetites? Now, before we wrap up, listen. The world that you and I actually live in is, we've all got moments and we've all got stories in our past where we have chosen the bowl of stew. I know that. And for some of you, here's the deal. You've violated your integrity in the past. You may be in the middle of violating it right now. And you're not sure how to get it back. And I'll tell you, there is a way to get it back. But it's not easy. You know what you have to do? You can't act like you don't care about it. You can't act like it doesn't matter. You can't say, I don't have any regrets. No, you have to own it. You have to confess it to God, absolutely. But you have to confess it also to the people that were hurt by your decision to choose an appetite over what you valued most. And for some of you, your problem is you've never gone back and cleaned up all those messes as best you could. You've never gone back and talked to those people and owned it and said, I'm sorry, I do care. I hate that it hurt you that way. I hate I made that decision. If I could change it, I'd change it in a heartbeat. You've never asked for forgiveness. You've never tried to the best of your ability to clean up the mess that you made. And listen, until you do that, and I know this makes us all uncomfortable because none of us want to have those conversations, but until you go back and you do that, you will continue to live with a fractured soul. You will not be whole and complete. And you know this. I don't have to convince you of this because internally you know everything's not right between you and people. You haven't done your part. People of integrity, they own it, they confess it, they go back and they try to clean up what they've messed up. They make amends. They ask for apologies. They extend those apologies to the people who were hurt by them. That's what integrity does. But on the other side of all that uncomfortable conversation is integrity and peace. And when you do that, God promises to heal you, to make you whole again. Years and years went by for Esau and Jacob. And then after a couple of decades, they crossed paths again, came face to face. Only this time was different. They both had enough humility that they owned their part. They tried to make things right. And God healed that relationship. And he can heal yours too. Because after all, when Jesus died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sins, he didn't just die for some of them. He died for all of them, including the violations of integrity that we've chosen. So if you'll meet him on his terms, if you'll do your part, he'll heal you. He'll restore your integrity. He'll make you whole again. That's why integrity, the integrity of the upright, people who stand up and look way down the road and make choices based on that, that's why the integrity of those kinds of people guides them perfectly. So do what you ought to, regardless of what it costs you. And trust God to meet you and to make up the difference that you can't do. Let me pray for us. Father, would you help us to be aware this week? Maybe our biggest struggle, we're just so used to allowing our appetites to rule us and to call the shots that we're not even aware we're doing it sometimes. But appetites that rule us always ruin us in the long run. So would you help us to be aware this week of whatever the bowl of stew is for us? Help us just to notice it, first of all. And then help us to choose, as we live in that tension, to walk in the way of integrity and to walk away from the appetites that scream for our attention right now. For the people who are here and past decisions, whether it was last week or 2 decades ago, but some things are coming to mind, some violations of integrity. They've never been fully owned and addressed. I know it's uncomfortable, but would you give them the courage to do what needs to be done on their end, to own it, confess it, make things right, ask for forgiveness, extend apologies, so that they'll give you the space by doing that to bring healing and wholeness, so that they don't have to continue to walk with fractured integrity, with a fractured soul. Thank you, Jesus, for offering us forgiveness and making wholeness possible for us because of your grace. It's in your name we pray. Amen.